three so-called debates were nothing more than a massive language of avoidance. They avoided the central issue of politics in America, which is the concentration of corporate power over our entire country, our society. That is the central issue of politics. Power. Who has it? Who doesn't? Who should have it? Who should have less of it? 47 million people don't have health insurance. Another 50 million underinsured. People are in deeper debt than ever before. The national debt is reaching records every day. Jobs are being outsourced to fascist and communist dictators under the World Trade Agreement and NAFTA, the corporate globalization of the world, to make sure that countries that know how to keep workers in their place, fascist and communist nations, can pull down our standards of living because we've eliminated the barriers to protecting the justice, the economic justice in this country. That's what these globalized trade agreements are all about. Enabling multinational corporations represented by the New York Stock Exchange to ship jobs and industries abroad and allow fascist and communist dictators to pull down our standard of living, our standard of justice, and we cannot stand for that anymore. Now, if anybody up in these offices doesn't think that you are representative of the American people, consider three recent polls. 9 out of 10 of the American people think America is in decline. 3 out of 4 believe corporations have too much control over their lives. And 6 out of 10 think the two major parties, Republican and Democrats, are failing. So we are representative of the majority, the overwhelming majority of the American people. Much of what's happened in the last month has been predicted by leading journalists, Gretchen Morgenson, Robert Monks, Ben Stein, by papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. But they never seem to want to cover their readers who organize and want to do something about it in this presidential year. That's really a gap, I would say, a gap in journalism. So we're here today, not just to speak to the New York Stock Exchange and its CEO, Duncan Nader. We're here to speak to the media and ask them, why do you expose all these injustices and then shut out the American people and their representatives from doing something about it? New York City is heading for a deep recession. The financial industry is collapsing all around it. And that has a large ricochet effect on jobs and small businesses throughout the city and the state. Why did this happen? It happened because of some old-fashioned frailties called a combination of greed attached to concentrated power that is unregulated and flared by what Richard Fisher, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas, called recently, quote, a sustained orgy of excess and speculative behavior on Wall Street, end quote, right from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a government within a government. It's funded by bankers and pretty much controlled by bankers, and should be replaced with an accountable central bank, accountable to the people of this country through public appropriation and open disclosure. What Wall Street has been doing is taking trillions of dollars of worker pension funds, mutual funds, savings, the financial future of the American people, what they're going to bequeath to their children and grandchildren. And they've poured these trillions of dollars into the biggest casino on earth, casino capitalism, represented by the New York Stock Exchange. The corporate destruction of capitalism, and I address this to the brokers here and the ones that are really exercising like what we're doing, how we're enriching ourselves, how we're tanking our own companies, how we're underemploying workers in these companies to hundreds of thousands, and sell your stock. That's not good enough. Principle of capitalism number 2 is you're free to fail. If you're a small business, you're free to fail. Nobody bails you out. That's the only thing left of capitalism in this country. Because if you're too big to fail, you go to Washington, D.C. to get bailed out. The third principle of capitalism is capitalists should not use government to make an unlevel playing field. They should not use government power to give them privileges, to give them resources at bargain-based prices like the natural resources on the public land. They should not use government to tilt the imbalance of power in terms of tax-paying obligations between the powerful corporations and the rest of the companies in this country. That's what I mean when I say they have destroyed principles of capitalism. And how important is this? Here's how important it is. Corporations have only 2 symbols. They have only 2 symbols by which they control the American people. One is patriotism, and that's going out the window, as these giant multinationals demonstrate every day that they have no allegiance to our country except to control it or ship its jobs and industries abroad. They have no patriotism in this country. They want to be a national. And the second is market ideology. They're telling you, we're risking our money, and if we make profit, fine, but if we make losses, we have to absorb them. That is finished now. There are no more symbols that these corporations can use to manipulate the American people. And so they're left with that flag that they have defiled, that flag that they have desecrated, that flag that represents the last words of the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty and justice for all, not for some, not for a few.
Not that you don't have a nice space.
The giant bailout of Washington, the giant bailout of Wall Street was predicted by none other than Karl Marx, who said, if you give enough rope to the capitalists, you know what they will do with it. The giant bailout of Wall Street by socialism. Imagine socialism bailing out capitalism. It doesn't even get a rate of return. This bailout of $700 billion, I say to you, was the ultimate insult to the American people. There were no public hearings. There were no public hearings where the best minds could be brought to bear on what to do of the speculative binge. There were no public hearings that invited the representatives of workers, consumers, and taxpayers who are being handed the bill in one way or another. This was a backroom deal between George W. Bush, not Dick Cheney, he was at an undisclosed location, by George W. Bush and the Democrats in Congress. The deal was cut with an additional $150 billion of freebies for commercial interest groups, including Microsoft Corporation. And here's what happened. Here's what happened, because they shut out the American people and they sold out the American people. Here's what happened. It's an eerie historical irony. In 1775, we had 13 colonies under King George III. Today we have 50 colonies under King George IV, because today, as it was in 1775, it was taxation without representation.